I think it was time I said something controversial, yet brave. I do not hate Eldar. I know, shocking, but please try to restrain your fury and your disgust. There was a time that I did not like Eldar at all, a dislike that even reached to the fantasy origin point in elves, and that spawned purely from me not having any fun painting the Eldar that came in the Eldritch Omens box from 9th edition, a set of miniatures that I still have and that I have tried to sell for many years. But ever since I learned more about Lady Aurelia Malice, Archon of the Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue, I started saying, if they release a Lady Malice mini, I will start a Drukhari army. You really couldn't keep your meow hole shut, could you, Lily? I still don't have Lady Malice, something I plan to rectify when I have spare money, but right now, I wanted to talk about the Eldar, just generally. The Eldar have a long and storied history, both in and out of universe, present in 40k since the very start of the setting, and with miniatures from the very start too. These slender, elegant beings have been present in many forms, from the restrained and thoughtful Craftworld Eldar, to the sadistic and terrifying Dark Eldar, to the manic performers, honestly same, of the Harlequins, and even the Exodites. Bring them back, GW. So today, let's go through the history of the Eldar in miniatures. All Eldari. This video might be a bit long, so let's get to it. In March of 1987, before Rogue Trader was even released, Games Workshop released a batch of various different sci-fi models for Rogue Trader. Some are still perfectly recognizable to us in the modern day, like the Space Goblin, the Space Orc, and the Imperial Psyker, while others would get some major tweaks before returning to 40k, like the Imperial Bodyguard or the Space Dwarf, who would be re-released in the RT7 mercenary range as Iron Bonds the Squat. Others still would be wiped out completely, never to be seen again, like the Piscean Warrior. And yes, I know Pisceans are a thing in Necromunda, don't start. But one of the more curious ones is this Dark Elf Space Trooper. Their weapon of choice is probably some sort of Weber, and they have some sort of weird neck thing on, looking very much like a neck pillow. The helmet is also very, very slim. This specific fella would not remain in 40k for long, but when 40k finally released officially, the Space Elves would get a wave of new miniatures, and a new name too, the Eldar. Of all the galaxy's ancient races, the Eldar most closely resemble mankind. Averaging just over 2 meters, they are a little taller than humans, more slightly built, and more delicately featured. In human terms, most Eldar are radiantly beautiful. Skin color is pale, in some cases almost white. Their ears are delicately pointed, but otherwise there is little physical difference between Eldar and humans. The Eldar of the Rogue Trader rulebook are described as living in craft worlds, which are still described as functionally independent nations, though only described as being tens of miles across, which feels kind of small for me considering how massive craft worlds are today, but hey, I don't use miles, so what do I know? Another curiosity is the use of warp gates on craft worlds, something the Eldari of today would likely never use, as such things would only bring them in closer to their ancient enemy, Slaanesh. But Slaanesh didn't exist back then, and there is no mention of the webway in this book, at least that I could find. Eldar in this book are described as being made of mercenary warbands, as most craft worlds do not have standing militaries. As such, the Eldar are described as being able to take a multitude of weapons, including some very human weapons like auto-weapons, las cannons, and bolt guns. But then Space Marines were able to take shuriken catapults back then, so who am I to judge? Oh, hey, look! This Eldar has that neck brace thing the Dark Elf Space Trooper had. Neat. Along with this, we saw the release of some Eldar miniatures in the RT4 range of Space Elves. It's always lovely looking through these catalogues, if for nothing else than the names. For example, at least based on their name, the autogun-wielding Alessia Wildfire might be among the first female Eldar minis released. We also got some Eldar command squads, and a reminder that at this time even 40k minis had musicians. And yes, Chaos Demons have musicians, I am aware. But here we had the harp-playing Kelos Longfinger, the head-mounted bagpipe, I guess, playing Tal Spellsinger, and Kylie Lightbrow, who is... What are you doing? DJ? Just dancing to boost morale? I genuinely don't know. Oh, apparently Tal is wearing a voice amplifier, I guess? And Kylie is... synths? Really? I've never played a synth that looks like that. In February 1988, Chapter approved the Book of the Astronomicon was released, and with it we got some army lists we could use to build our own forces for Warhammer 40k. Alongside the White Scars, Hilgar's Hellraiser's Imperial Army Regiment, and the Orcish Logob's Drop Legion, we got the Eldritch Raiders, an Eldar pirate force led by, you guessed it, Uriel. Curiously, a number of the names for the units here sound much more imperial than any Eldar unit today. The pirate leader is called Imperator, lieutenants are called Prefectors, while psychic lieutenants are Malefactors, and the standard officers are Probati. The only officer that sounds vaguely Eldari is the Shadow Lord, the name for the cadre captain. Other things you could take are Serpent Squads, Dragon Squads, Zote Terror Squads, Bollock Jet Cycles, Eldar Gravatax, Stolen Imperial Land Speeders, and Eldar Dreadnoughts. Side note, in the previous video I said that the Eldritch Raiders could take Hellfire Land Raiders. This I said in error. It was the Claw Nebula Pirates Krangor's Buccaneers. In my defense, they can take Eldar in their force. But yeah, I made a mistake. Terribly sorry for spreading false information on the internet. But speaking of Eldar Dreadnoughts, those would see an official release in April of 1988. Buildable either as the double-fisting War Demon, the plasma-gunning Banshee, or the las-cannon-wielding Warcry. These dreadnoughts quite clearly resemble the Wraith Lords they would eventually turn into. This did not, however, mean that we would be lacking in spooky ghost warriors. May of 1988 saw the release of the Eldar War Robots, the tall-standing Spirit Warrior and the smaller Ghost Warriors. The Spirit Warrior is a rather beautiful thing, armed with a fist and a plasma gun, and looking a bit more like the Eldar Knights and Titans we would meet later down the line. The Ghost Warriors, on the other hand, are infantry-sized battle drones, possibly a precursor for Wraithguard, though much more on the stealthy side, clad in Cameleo line. As Rogue Trader rolled on, the Eldar got a lot more things we would recognize even today. The War Walker that truly forced the pilot to expose their greatest weakness was released, as were artillery in the form of D-cannons, which here meant dislocate, as well as other cannon types, namely plasma guns, scatter lasers, and las cannons. Eldar jet bikes were introduced as well, as were Eldar Scouts, that we would now know as Rangers, and in 1991, the RTB-17 Eldar Guardians were released. This box set showcased Eldar in a much more uniform style than the previous releases, and came as metal bodies with plastic weapons and arms, allowing for multiple weapon combinations. Seemingly the most common weapon was the lasgun, but the set came with plenty of shuriken weapons as well, being one of the earliest Eldar sets to come with primarily shuriken weapons. But this was not all the Eldar were getting. In September 1988, the RTB6 Harlequins box was released, and White Dwarf 105 told us all about it. I do not have access to this issue of White Dwarf, but I do have access to the article as it was reprinted in the Warhammer 40,000 compendium. Hrithar had seen a Harlequin troop only once before, as a child several decades ago. But now he had been chosen as a laver to welcome the Mask of the Dance Without End to Saimhan Craftworld. He fought down tension as the warp gate opened and 24 figures stepped out of the shifting, coruscating colors. It was said that Harlequins could smell fear, and as the spokesman of his craftworld, it was not seemly to show any. The newcomer's appearance certainly lived up to the stories. 3 little knots of troopers each manhandled a trunk like a garishly colored coffin, which hovered just above the deck on suspensors. 3 skull-masked Margarach, death jesters, glided forward with their reapers and flame lances on their backs, moving automatically toward the chamber's cardinal defense points. 4 Isdine, warlocks, strolled forward in a group, their masks bobbing in an animated discussion that had evidently begun on the other side of the warp gate. The Ather, the avatars who played the laughing god in the mask and led each troop in battle, emerged last, the fixed, ironic half-smiles on their masks seeming to comment on what had come before. A lot of the stuff in this article still holds up to this day. The Harlequins are known in the language of the Eldar as Rilietan, and exist beyond conventional Eldar societal structure, owing allegiance to no craftworld. They pay homage to their laughing god, Kegorach. They wear holosuits and flip belts, and the members of the masks, the avatars, that would be called Great Harlequins now, death jesters, warlocks, Shadowseers today, and troopers who make up the bulk of the Harlequin forces are all present. There are also mention of mimes, led by master mimes, who form their own troops during combat and performances. Finally, there is the Solitaire, who, even here, are said to play the role of the ancient enemy of the Eldar, Slaanesh. In November of 1989, blister packs of Harlequins would be released to complement the RTB6 box, and alongside them came Harlequin jet bikes. The Harlequins could even take their own versions of the Eldar Dreadnought that could be made by attaching the front plate of a jet bike to an Eldar Dreadnought's face. Very elegant. Harlequins could also take over Imperial robots, and even pilot Land Raiders. In 1990, Milton Bradley Games released, in collaboration with Games Workshop, the board game Space Crusade, which, yes, I will talk about at some point, once I have the expansions for it. Speaking of, in 1991, MBNGW released an expansion box set, Eldar Attack. This box introduced new missions, psychic powers, and 10 plastic Eldar, 9 warriors and a leader. They came with interchangeable arms, the warriors getting shuriken catapults and 3 heavy weapon options, 2 of each the shuriken cannon, the missile launcher and the las cannon. The leader could then wield a shuriken pistol and a power sword. These Eldar had designs based on the RTB-17 Eldar Guardians, though their poses were a little peculiar, as the miniatures had to accommodate interchangeable arms somehow, something that was a lot easier to do on the bulky Space Marines. The game also allowed for a 5th player this way, as previously the game was only really playable for 4 people, 3 Marines and 1 Dungeon Master. In 1991, we also saw the release of the Aspect Warriors, the horrifying melee monsters that were the Howling Banshees, the professional soldiers that were Dire Avengers, the stealthy melee fighters that were Striking Scorpions, the close-range support of the Fire Dragons, the long-range heavy firepower of the Dark Reapers, and the flying infantry bullies that were the Swooping Hawks. This list would also be rounded out during the turning of the edition with the teleporting melee blender of the Warp Spiders, but the first batch would also get named leaders, the Phoenix Lords, and something else as well. The Phoenix Lords, in the same order as their Aspect Warriors, were Jane Zar, Asserman, Karandras, Fuegan, Maugan Ra, and Baharoth. Along with them, the Eldar got some psychic leaders in the form of Farseers, Warlocks, and a named example, Eldrad Ulthran, Farseer of Ulthway. The support weapon battery was also updated to be an anti-grav platform this time around, but the biggest was yet to come, quite literally. Alongside all these smaller miniature releases, the Eldar got the Avatar of Cain, a massive hunk of metal to burn everything around it to the ground. And with that, I think it best that we step forward just a little bit. 2,000 plus words, and I am only now leaving Rogue Trader. This is gonna be a long one. Lost in the vastness of space, the craft worlds float in utter isolation, like scattered jewels upon a pool of velvet. No starshine illuminates their sleek towers. Distant from the warmth of sun or planet, their domes stare into the darkness of empty space. Inner lights glisten like phosphorus through semi-transparent surfaces. Within live the few survivors of planets abandoned eons ago, amidst terrifying destruction. These are the Eldar, a race that is all but extinct, the last remnants of a people whose mere dreams once overturned worlds and quenched suns. In 1994, Codex Eldar was released, the first Eldar codex we ever got, and was either the second or third codex overall, with Codex Orcs releasing the same year. This book told us a lot more about Eldar society in ways that actually stuck, including talking about the Webway, Infinity Circuits, Paths of the Eldar, and Phoenix Lords. Harlequins are also given their own segment, though all in all, things regarding them remain pretty similar. What's really interesting is two articles found here, The Fall of the Eldar and the Exodites. Most of the info on the fall is still pretty spot on, including the birth of Slaanesh from prideful hedonism on the ancient Eldar Empire's part, although the importance of Commorragh was not mentioned, as the Drukhari and their Dark City were not established at that time. The Exodites, on the other hand, are explained to be Eldar who resisted the hedonistic degeneration of their society, living on verdant maiden worlds far from the psychic epicenter that birthed the Dark Prince, and thus survived. They do not follow the path of the Eldar the same way Craftworlders do, and are more individualistic and adventurous. Also, they have Dragon Knights, which are Exodites riding dinosaurs.
Bring them back, GW!
In other news, Nagash is now an Eldar. Such is the power of Nagash. This is also the introduction to Wraithguard, who are Wraithbone constructs powered by the soul of an Eldar, who cannot actually see the living world, unless a living Eldar are nearby. Eldar Dreadnoughts are powered the same way, though these do not have to stick by a living Eldar to see. We also get the Viper, a larger jet bike with an additional gunner operating a shuriken cannon, heavy plasma gun, scatter laser, or las cannon. Curiously, this book also mentions Chaos Eldar, and say that few Chaos champions are as merciless as those of the Eldar variety. This is something that likely is no longer the case, as Eldar that embrace Chaos are devoured by Slaanesh. Around this time, we also got the set of plastic monopose Eldar Guardians. Their primary weapons were the lasgun, but they could also take shuriken catapults. They had a similar weapon attachment system as those old Space Crusade Eldar, but had significantly more natural poses. Let's take a gander at Epic now, shall we? For those who don't know, Epic was a 6mm scale wargame, allowing for larger battles with smaller miniatures. This let Games Workshop design much more varied vehicles, including some for the Eldar. In 1989, the first edition of Epic, Adeptus Titanicus, it's a long story and there's a really good video by Snipe and Wib about it, I'll link it in the pinned comment, introduced Eldar Titans, as well as Vampire Spirit Warriors, Warwalkers, and Eldar Dreadnoughts to the game. 1991 also introduced a multitude of Eldar units into the game, including two brand new vehicles, the Falcon Grav Tank and the Tempest. Alongside these, we got new Eldar Knights, including the bipedal Firegale Knights, the centaur-like Bright Stallions, and the four-armed Towering Destroyers. The following year saw the release of the Warp Hunter, the Deathstalker, the Doomweaver, and the Wave Serpent. In 1994, we got the Nightwing and the Firestorm, and in 1995 we got the Revenant Titan, a smaller scout variant of the Eldar Titan. Sometime in the early to mid-90s, a man in California called Mike Biasi sculpted his own 40k scale Titan based on one of the Epic designs. At the time, the only vehicles were the Rhino, and I guess the variants on it, and the Land Raider. Biasi got in contact with GW about producing and selling miniatures based on the Epic designs, and GW agreed, but apparently stipulated that these models could only be sold within the US. Mike Biasi started Mike Biasi Studios and got to work making miniatures, including 4 based on Eldar vehicles: the Tempest, the Towering Destroyer Knight, the Revenant Titan, and the Phantom Titan. Unfortunately, MBS had to end its partnership with GW due to Mike Biasi developing a sensitivity to the resin used in casting the miniatures. He was working alone, so this decision made sense. Meanwhile, another Californian person named Nick Tompkins decided to try the same thing but in the smaller direction. He too got in contact with GW and got the right to make models based on designs Biasi wasn't making. Tompkins started a company named Epicast and made some Eldar models of his own, this time a Doomweaver, a Prism Cannon, and a Falcon Grav Tank. They also made some not based on Epic designs, namely the Skimmer Sirocco, the Skimmer Scorpion, and the Skimmer Hawk. After Biasi's license ended, another firm stepped in, Forge World USA, that made a few new models based on Epic designs, namely the Wave Serpent, Doomweaver, and Deathstalker, but notoriously made recasts of MBS sculpts, including the Eldar Tempest. Mike Biasi then partnered up with a new company, Armorcast, that made revised versions of MBS sculpts, but also a few completely new models, including new Towering Destroyers, Revenants, Phantoms, and Tempests, as well as their own spin on the Falcon. This was a new sculpt compared to the one made by Epicast, being a bit bigger and having crisper detail. The masters for these models were sculpted by Mike Biasi, with a different team casting the minis in resin. These companies' licenses expired in 1998, when GW started Forge World proper. But something else came to an end around this time as well, namely the second edition of 40k. But before we talk about that, we need to talk about a video game. Rites of War was an isometric turn-based strategy game released in 1999, where you take the role of the ancient Eldar of Craftworld Eandon. The Imperials have settled on an ancient, verdant maiden world, and the Eldar must reclaim it, before their attention is diverted by a coming Tyranid hive fleet. It's not a great game. Many before and after are significantly more fun and prettier looking, but it is fun playing a game that's not from the Imperial point of view for once. The highlight of this game to me is the music, some of which you've been hearing in the background of my video. The model work for the Eldar, at least, is very fun too, even if the maps themselves look like the city playmat that some places had when I was a kid. You remember that? I remember that. Going backwards a year, the third edition of Warhammer 40k was released, and with it a box set, a precedent set by the second edition. But unlike that one, this set had something to talk about. New Eldar. And not just any Eldar, but Eldar that let me show off some of my own miniatures. Spawned in the darkest pits of the universe, the piratical Eldar are a curse upon all races of the galaxy. For untold thousands of years they have preyed upon us, stealing forth from the shadows and dark places on their raids of terror and violence, massacring or capturing all whose paths they cross. That they are utterly evil and inhuman is without question. 1998's Codex Dark Eldar was our first proper introduction to these callous, insidious raiders. Well, unless you count the Dark Elf Space Trooper as a Dark Eldar, but if you count that, then I'm allowed to use my 1992 Blood Slaughterer as a modern Blood Slaughterer Impaler. These new Dark Eldar had taken clear inspiration from the Eldar models of past, but added spikes and blades that would make them look very chaosy indeed if they also weren't deathly allergic to all things warp. The plastic warriors were armed with splinter rifles, with the possibility of taking a heavy splinter cannon. There was also a sprue to give one of your Kabalites a punch dagger, allowing them the chance to become a Cyberite. If you wanted to use other special weapons, you'd have to buy metal minis. Side note, the paragraph introducing the Dark Eldar contains this phrase: "The Dark Eldar are not nice. Not nice at all." Neat, thank you. Now for full transparency, the version I'm looking at is the second version of the Dark Eldar Codex from 2001, but ultimately that's got very little bearing on the things we'll be discussing. This codex was a bit of a shock to me. I've primarily looked at books from 2nd, 5th, 8th and 9th editions, and as such was very shocked by the fact that, despite this book being the first introduction to the Drukhari, barely anything is explained, other than that they're evil and like torturing people, before we're thrust into the armor list. One would have to go all the way to the end of the book for some lore. However, we do have an Imperial report on the Reaver jet bikes, which is fun. The Dark Eldar army list consists of a Dark Eldar Lord, which can be either an Archon, the leader of the Cabal, or a Drakon, their Starscream, a Witch Lord, which can be an Archite or Drakite, and the Homunculus, a twisted scientist responsible for all the vile monsters the Dark Eldar take to battle for characters. They can also take retinues formed of Dark Eldar warriors or incubi led by incubi masters. The incubi are an order of warriors without equal in Dark Eldar society. They can also take a raider to ride around on. For elites, you could take grotesques, horrible monsters made by the homunculi, mandrakes, shadowy warriors who always count as being in cover, witches, possibly led by a succubus, gladiators without peer who can take combat drugs to get even scarier, and warp beasts led by beastmasters. For troops, you could take a squad of warriors, who would later be named Kabalite warriors, and possibly led by a Cyberite, or a raider squad, which is Kabalites that start out in a raider transport. Fast attack was Reaver jet bikes led by succubi and Hellions led by succubi, the latter getting sick nasty hoverboards, my dude, radical. And for heavy support, you got Scourges, aka, you like swooping hawks? Well, what if swooping hawks could absolutely ruin your vehicle's day? These could be led by a Cyberite. You also got Ravagers, which were raiders with heavy weapons, and Talos Pain Engines, which were also made by the homunculi. This book also included a nice segment giving guidance on the strengths and weaknesses of each unit, which was nice, as this was a new army and people would be unfamiliar with how they work. Following that was also a color section, which also gave some tips on color schemes and names for your Cabal and cults. And before you ask, no, mine are not Poisoned Fang, they're Poisoned Tongue. It's different, and I would have you put respect on the Poisoned Tongue's name. Now we get to the background. We're given a story section about striking scorpions, fighting some Kabalites, before learning a bit about the weapons of the Dark Eldar. It's nice seeing that these have barely changed in the nearly 30 years that the Drukhari have been around, although I do not see a blaster anywhere. After that, we're given lore and rules for Asdrubael Vecht, who was given a custom Ravager, the Dice of Destruction, to chillax on, Cruella the Vile, someone was watching 101 Dalmatians I see, Archon of the Emasculators, charming name, Lelith Hesperax, who let you take witches as troops, Drazar, who looked a lot more mantis-like than his current design, Yurian Rakath, who always wounded on a successful hit, and Decapitator, the Mandrake champion, who is at least called Karadrach in the little box out next to his lovely face. Still in 3rd edition, we would have to wait but a year for our next stop, 1999's Codex Eldar. This came alongside a bit of a range refresh, though you would not see it from the Codex itself, which still used the same models as in 2nd edition. But one new thing that we did get was an official plastic Falcon grav tank. Much more akin to the Viper in its design sensibilities, the Falcon is a lovely mini. In fact, this mini is still sold on the GW store and can build not just the Falcon, but also the Fire Prism, with a Wave Serpent added to the kit in 2005, though the Fire Prism would get a new version in 5th edition. Around 2000, we would also get updates to the Aspect Warriors, except the Warp Spider. Of note are the Dire Avengers, who got an upgrade sprue to the standard Guardians kit, which was made in metal, causing the new plastic Guardians to become wildly imbalanced. Over time, most other Eldar models would get updates as well. I won't dwell on that for too long. Remember Forge World? Well, she's back! Imperial Armor 2, Orc, Eldar and Dark Eldar vehicles for Warhammer 40,000 introduced us to... well, that. The Eldar got rules for the Wave Serpent, the Night Runner, the Scorpion, the Cobra, the Nightwing, and the enormous Vampire Raider, which was the first super heavy flyer, at least excluding that one metal Thunderhawk they made, though that one was super heavy in physical weight. While the Dark Eldar got the Raven and the Razorwing. While not present in the Imperial Armor book, the Eldar also got an updated Revenant Titan around this time, with a significantly more humanoid shape than the long-legged beetles of old Epic. While there were a few new things added to the Eldar force in 3rd edition's Codex Craftworld Eldar, like the Spirit Seers of Eandin and Seer Councils of Ulthwé, overall things did not change much until the next edition, where in 2006 we got Codex Eldar 4th edition, and with it, an update to the Harlequins. The Harlequins seen here were cast in metal and later in resin, and while the poses have changed slightly, overall things have remained the same. Sure, names have changed, like the avatars turning to Troop Masters and Great Harlequins, and Warlocks becoming Shadow Seers, but other than that, things are, and very much were, still the same. With some omissions. The Mimes and Dreadnoughts are completely gone, and the Solitaire and the Jet Bikes are nowhere to be seen. This codex was still in use throughout the 5th edition of the game, but this was when GW released a new Dark Eldar codex and with it, a sweeping range refresh, as well as some new characters. But first, let's look at some of the miniatures, which is surprisingly easy, as some are still in use to this day. The Kabbalite Warriors are a lovely update, sleeker and less cartoony than the old ones, exemplifying this new look for the, now fancily named, Drukhari perfectly. The menacing look, the spikes, the hooks on the belts, it's all wonderful. Apparently the armor is also held in place by hooks and barbs, which is... neat? The witches match this modern Drukhari aesthetic nicely as well, and even the Raider and Ravager have gotten updates. Honestly, everything except for Vect have, it's just that I don't have those specific minis. But now for the new stuff. Kabbalite Warriors can be updated to Kabbalite Trueborn, making them more murderous in combat, and letting you add a Drakon to the team. Similarly, witches can be updated to Hecatrix Bloodbrides, led by Sirens. The leaders of witch squads are now Hecatry. Beastmasters, now mounted on the Hellions hoverboards, can now have the Clawed Fiends, Chimeras, or Razorwings. That's birds, not the fighters, but you can have Razorwing fighters as well. Mandrakes are now shadowy demons from a sort of shadow dimension parallel to Komara, and get evil-looking blades. Archons can now take a Court of the Archon as a retinue, including Medusae, Lamaeans, Urguls, and the snaky Selith. Succubi are now character units for your witches, and the homunculi get a standard foot soldier, the Rax. The Talos has gotten a nasty new update, and has a new gross sibling, the Kronos Parasite Engine. I imagine them to be much like Tumblr's Improbable Cake. They're terrible, they're awful, they're wet. The new Venoms are smaller transports that can carry 5 models inside them. They're similar to the Viper jet bike, but with a carrying capacity. Void Ravens are big bombers that have unique Void Lances for weapons. I want them. No actual model for them though. Finally, the denizens of the Dark City can be bolstered by the mirthful myriad of the Harlequins, including a Shadow Seer if you want to add some psychic defense to your army. I know I will. Now for the new characters. Baron Sithonyx is a Hellion lord, once a noble in the cabal of the Slashed Eye, before he brought a captured Farseer to Comora. This is a crime, and for his horrible deed, Sithonyx and the Seer were ordered to be killed. Sithonyx, however, survived and hunted down the members of the Slashed Eye, building for himself an impressive gang of Hellions, and still carrying the bones of the Farseer, who changed his fate forever. Duke Sliscus was another noble, and had grown tired of the politics of Comora, so he commandeered 3 Kabbalite flagships and started his own pirate crew of Drukhari. Oh my god, that is goals. Drazar has seen an update big enough to make note of. Drazar makes his first appearance in the Incubi history with little fanfare, before challenging and killing the hierarch of an Incubus sanctum. This has led to rumors that this mysterious monster is the lost phoenix Ahra, formerly the Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions, whose armor Karandras tirelessly seeks. Okay, everybody shut up. This is where you lot get to experience the weirdness that is Lilly obsessing over a single character for an entire page's worth of the script. Lady Aurelia Malice, Archon of the Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue. Though she's less than 1,000 years old, Lady Aurelia Malice is a mighty Archon, even being a match for Vecht in intellect. Once she was Vecht's consort, but took control of her own cabal, the Poisoned Tongue, and proved her might with not only her blade, but also her words, and only the most clever are allowed to join her cabal. Shortly after her falling out with Vecht, Lady Aurelia Malice took a band of her most loyal servants into the Webway, where suddenly Malice found herself separated from her followers, and face to face with a strange being of pure light. This being challenged Malice to a contest of wits, and the winner would get the loser's heart. Despite everything, Malice was able to defeat this peculiar creature, matching it riddle for riddle, trick for trick. This creature vanished, leaving behind a heart of pure crystal, a strange living sword, and a disembodied chuckle. Lady Malice took this heart and the strange sword, used the blade to carve out her own still-beating heart, and replaced it with the crystal heart, which still beats inside her chest. It is after this that Lady Malice's Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue has become one of the mightiest in all of Comora. It is even rumored that it is Malice who will usurp Vecht one day as Supreme Overlord of Comora. Huh, that was significantly less gushing than I was expecting. Now, something I did not really mention was the newer Forge World stuff. Since the Imperial Armor 2, more and more fantastic new resin models have been released, including the Corsairs, a precursor to the new Corsair Void Reavers, and a nice homage to Iriel's old gang from Rogue Trader, as shown in these pictures. Along with these, we got the Wasp Assault Walker, the Shadow Spectre Aspect Warriors, who are like a mix of Swooping Hawks and Dark Reapers, so flying anti-armor fire support, and their Phoenix Lord Irilith. I got a Shadow Spectre Phoenix Lord before a Warp Spider one. The Wraith Seer, a Seer turned Wraith Lord, the Hornet Skimmer, and the Warp Hunter and Lynx Grav Tanks, and an updated Phantom Titan, now in 40k scale. All this was added in Imperial Armor Volume 11, The Doom of Mimira. Still with Forge World, we also got a few new Forge World things for the Dark Eldar, namely the Reaper, a Raider upgrade that got a big ol' Storm Vortex projector on its prow, and the Tantalus, a big ol' grav tank roughly in the size and shape of 2 Ravagers, though armed with a more unique Scythe Vein armament, as well as pulse disintegrator cannons. In 2012, the 6th edition of Warhammer 40k was released, and a year later we got Codex Eldar, alongside the usual updated Farseer, stuff like that. We also got some new stuff. The Wraith Guards got updated, but not just that, expanded, now able to become melee-focused Wraith Blades as well. Alongside that, we got the Wraith Knight, a reimagined look of the Eldar Knights from Epic. We also got the Crimson Hunters and Hemlock Wraith Fighters, brand new Eldar jet fighters with some aesthetic similarities to the previous edition's Razorwing. The 7th edition of Warhammer 40k came out in 2014, and with it came a number of new codices. Specifically, in 2015 we got a new Codex Eldar, which reintroduced the Eldar jet bikes as the Wind Riders we know today, with Warlock and Farseer Skyrunners as new units, the Skathach Wraith Knight as a new configuration of the Wraith Knight, and a Forge World upgrade turning your Wind Riders into Corsair jet bike riders. A year earlier, the Drukhari got their 7th edition codex, though there was also a Codex Homunculi Covens. This gave us an update to the racks and, curiously, 2 editions late, an actual miniature for the Void Raven, something that, despite having rules in 5th edition, had no miniatures. We also got this annoying bastard of an Archon that I do have to talk about, as I have the miniature. This is the most monopose Archon, only having one set of weapon options, despite the unit being able to take significantly more. Its pose is imposing, but if you want any variety, you have to work your butt off for it, as I did. My headcanon is that she is a Drakon for Lady Malice, and rules in her stead when she's away. But most curiously, in 2015, we got Codex Harlequins, letting Harlequins be used as a standalone army for the first time since Rogue Trader, and with it we got a whole host of new Harlequin miniatures. The Troop and Great Harlequin are finally in plastic, praise Skegorach. The kit comes with a shuriken catapult for each model, as well as some form of blade for them, but also comes with a few fusion pistols and neural disruptors, as well as the Harlequin's unique melee weapons. The Harlequin's Kiss, a monofilament injector that tears the opponent to shreds from the inside, the Harlequin's Embrace, which launch a cloud of monofilament around the opponent, wrapping around them and tearing them to shreds, and the Harlequin's Caress, a phase field generator, allowing the wielder to reach through armor and flesh and, among other things, tear out the opponent's heart as if there was nothing in the way. With names this dramatic, I really should not be surprised I wound up collecting Harlequins. Alongside new troopers, we also got plastic kits for the Death Jester and Shadowseer, as well as a trio of completely new units. The Skyweavers are jet bike troopers, flying nimbly and adding danger and excitement to their performances. The Starweavers are larger skimmers and are aesthetically and functionally very similar to the Venom, able to carry 5 Harlequins in and out of combat. The Void Weaver is the same chassis, but turned into a mobile weapons platform, able to use Haywire, Prism, and Shuriken weapons to deal with enemies. And last, but certainly not least, this wave of releases also brought us the first new model of a Solitaire since Rogue Trader. Look at them. Aren't they gorgeous? Now clad in a black trench coat and wearing a horned mask with a cowl, the Solitaire is a much more mysterious looking figure. They are armed with a Harlequin's Kiss, and some use psychic powers, but primarily, the Solitaire is a melee blender, weaving in and out of the shadows before striking the decisive blow. 2017 saw the start of the Gathering Storm series, and notably, the release of a new sub-faction of the Eldar, the Inari. In the wake of the 13th Black Crusade, Eldrad Ulthran, Farseer of Ulthwé, attempted a ritual to hasten the birth of the Eldar goddess of death, Iniad. The ritual was interrupted, but managed to awaken aspects of the yet-to-be-born god, and one of these aspects took root in a dying witch in the gladiator pits of Comora, Ivrain. Iniad's power awakened in her, and with the assistance of a surprise ally in the form of the Vizarch, Ivrain formed the Ynnari, functionally a death cult of Eldar, trying to awaken Iniad. One step in that was the retrieval of a crone sword from the depths of the craftworld Bieltan, causing the craftworld to fracture, but giving birth to the Incarn, avatar of Iniad. Ivrain would wind up aiding the Adeptus Mechanicus Archmagos Belisarius Call in reawakening Robute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, and with that, we are reaching modernity. The Eldar have had updated miniatures and a few new units, like the Shining Spears aspect host and Shroud Runner jetbikes. But perhaps the most important development in Eldar miniatures is the reveal of Lycus, the Phoenix Lord of the finally updated Warp Spiders, only took them 30 years, and the disappearance of Karandras, Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions, somewhere in the webway. And that is partially the reason for my incubi being the brightest green you've ever seen. And then, of course, there's the stuff coming out now. A new Viper jetbike and a variant, the Starfang, along with new Corsair Sky Reavers, Karseth the Voidseer, and a brand new model for Prince Uriel. Oh, yeah, there was also a Prince Uriel model in 4th edition. The Eldritch Raiders are back in full force. As for the Drukhari, we haven't got much. An update to the Incubi and Rezar in 2018, a new Lilith Hesperax mini in 2020, some Mandrakes for Kill Team in 2024, and a new multi-part Archon model just last year, 2025. Oh, and just one more thing. Lady Aurelia Malice, Archon of the Cabal of the Poison Tongue, the reason I had this stupid army project in the first place! You know, can't forget that. Thank you for watching this video. Also, a huge thank you to Remlays of 40k Theories for reposting the link to my first proper video. I am genuinely honored and flattered. I wanted to do a short and sweet video, but wound up accidentally doing one that's 6,500 words long. Oh well, c'est la vie. I suppose I could have put on some Rites of War music at the end here, but no. I had to go for my favorite Final Liberation song because it has piano. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see more in the Eldar ranges. I love my Harlequins, and Lady Malice was the reason why I started collecting any Eldar, but I do genuinely want Exodite Dragon Knights back. I mean, come on! Space elves, riding space dinosaurs, how cool is that? Anywho, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!